So friends, in the second part of the discussion, we take a closer look at the poetry that Kamla Das wrote in the 1960s, 70s and later. And I would request straight away Prof. Nagpal to read out one or two poems by her so that we can directly respond to it, raise questions, and then we can find some answers or some kind of clarity regarding the points that she has made creatively. So over to you, Professor Payal Nagpal. Please read a poem and let us know as to how she writes.
Thank you, Professor Prakash. So, there are two poems that we'll be taking up today. One is My Grandmother's House and the other is an introduction. And these are from her earlier collection, which is titled Summer in Calcutta, written in 1965. And, going back to the post-independence period, looking at a female poet who's writing about episodes connected to her life, and she's doing it creatively in the genre of poetry, is very, very, radical in a sense, and, that was certainly not the norm. And this also opens up the whole question of, the context of women in the 1960s. And we see the resonances of all these, things that she has actually mentioned in these two poems. They are pretty much taken up in her, life writing, My Story. So here is a poem, My Grandmother's House. It begins like this. There is a house now far away where once I received love. That woman died. The house withdrew into silence. Snakes moved among books. I was then too young to read, and my blood turned cold like the moon. How often I think of going there, to peer through blind eyes of windows, or just listen to the frozen air, or in wild despair, pick an armful of darkness to bring it here to lie, behind my bedroom door like a brooding dog. You cannot believe, darling, can you, that I lived in such a house and was proud and loved? I, who have lost my way and beg now at strangers' doors to receive love, at least in small change.
See, I would like you to comment on the word "I" in her poem that you have recited, and that she is actually keeping her focus entirely on her response to the grandmother's house, which is now in a state of decay. And there was a time, when there was more light there, but now she has an armful of darkness and words like that, which are very rich in connotation. So, do you think that in this poem she is talking about two time segments? This segment when her grandmother lived and she was there as a young child, and later on when nostalgically she comes back to the same house and finds her in a state of decay.
Actually, more than the decay, the house symbolizes love. I think the key takeaway in this poem is her yearning for love. And love that also gives her a certain sense of belonging, a certain sense of personhood. The individuality that she's exploring is something that is it's like the umbilical connect. And that it lies with the grandmother's house. So, she says that today, you might see her as a woman who's probably not getting the kind of love and affection that she deserves. But there was a time when, she was proud and she was loved. So, all these positive emotions are associated with the grandmother's house. And, she says that that house is now far away, and she has this yearning to look through that house, to look into the windows, and in a sense she's looking for that love to give her that sense of being, that sense of personhood. Her individuality is what she's looking for, because the present, as you rightly pointed out, the two time segments, the present time segment is very harsh. It's cruel, because she now is at strangers' doors, and she wishes to receive love at least in small change. And she says there was a time, however, she was she belonged to a house, she was proud, she was loved, but all that is something that she has now lost. So my grandmother's house, in this sense, it kind of indicates and symbolizes the way in which the young child, and that's another thing, that she's able to bring in her own persona as a young child. And so the second time segment, looking back at the previous one and commenting on that in a sense was a more secure and loved period, whereas for a woman to evolve into adulthood means a kind of a certain severance from the house that belonged to the grandmother.
In this context, now the question definitely can be raised regarding, the romanticism that is in the poem, that she wants to go back to that period when grandmother was alive, and that she was having the poet was having a kind of love from the grandmother, and that now that love is actually a thing of the past. So, do you see some romantic connection in this poem with the English romanticism?
Uh, I mean, we can connect it to that, but I think I would see it more as, kind of norm where, in case, like the home is a secure place, in case it is, because at times the home is also not a secure place for women. So, in case it is a secure place for women, it is something that the woman remains very connected to, and she derives her individuality and her identity through that house, like the grandmother's house. And of course, in the case of the English romantics, it's more about observation, and it's the dismal reality that they are seeing because of industrialization is certainly there. That these there too we see two different contexts, but probably the pain here is far more in the case of Kamla Das writing as a woman poet. It's also very interesting because in her life writing later, she discusses how school was also a very disturbing experience for her, and so to look at the grandmother's house as that very very secure space is interesting, because she talks about discrimination, racial discrimination, and how when she would actually be there in the convent, the white children and the fair skinned ones would be treated much better. So when the visitors came, she would say that the brown children were always discreetly hidden away, swept under the carpet, and told to wait in the corridor behind the lavatories where the school ayahs kept them company. So there are childhood experiences that the realization of color, what she says, the awareness of a Nestle chocolate wrapped in red paper. So but at the same time, through all these very very fractured experiences, even during childhood, it is her grandmother's house that really speaking gives her that sense of completeness and gives her that sense of belonging. So and in this sense, both the poems, that is my grandmother's house, and it's my grandmother's house, so she's also claiming that space. She's going back to that space and she's claiming it, and in the present moment, going back to that space gives her some comfort. So I think that's the reason why that space becomes very precious for her. And
You have found some kind of a combine, some kind of a connect of the woman with the home. And because the woman is generally, in the Indian context and in the 1950s and 60s, would be confined to home, and she would know very little about the world outside. And therefore, she has that kind of abiding interest in the home. So, home actually defines the nature, the trait, the privacy of the world that she belongs to. Would you buy this argument?
uh,
Woman,
to
home, they connect,
so
not society as such.
home again is a very controversial word, because home is also a construct that works in different ways. So, for example, for her it's her grandmother's home that she's talking about, and that works for her. But the home in which she is placed after marriage, even that is supposed to be her home, but that doesn't work to her favor at all. So the term home also, I wouldn't kind of universalize it and connect it with women unconditionally. There are always conditions attached.
Of course.
So I wouldn't do that. So, and the reason why, despite having a home, she yearns for the grandmother's home. I think that house, that says a lot about the gap between her past and her present.
So do you think she is making a kind of comment, critical comment on patriarchy? That she had a grandmother's house and now she has another house where she finds herself insecure and lonely.
Certainly. She's certainly making a comment, against patriarchy. Yes.
Would you?
Yes, certainly. Which is why I said that, these are two different homes also, not just time segments, but two different homes. One that is, in a sense, indirectly implicated, in her
And has the colony also entered again, the memory of the colony, that there are whites, there are blacks or
Yes.
browns, and that the two are not able to get together, and therefore the woman also feels a sense of loss, that she is outside that particular pale of
So,
education.
I think specifically when one looks at, poetry, her poetry and her writings of the 1960s and 70s, it is very important to connect her poetry with her life writing, because one sees, and even in those very, very difficult moments when she's made to realize her color is something that one connects it with the comfort of the grandmother's house. And of course we see some very similar things in another poem by her, and here I just read parts of the poem because it's a longer one. It's titled An Introduction. I am Indian, very brown, born in Malabar. I speak 3 languages, write in 2, dream in 1. Don't write in English, they said. English is not your mother tongue. Why not leave me alone, critics, friends, visiting cousins, every one of you? Why not let me speak in any language I like? The language I speak becomes mine, its distortions, its queerness, all mine, mine alone. It is half English, half Indian, funny perhaps, but it is honest. It is as human as I'm human. Don't you see? It voices my joys, my longings, my hopes. So, what we see here is a lot of things. I think the discussion we had right at the beginning connects very well with Kamla Das's articulation of both her Indian context and her choice of language. So where she does write in Malayalam, but she says that English is not your. People tell her that English is not her mother tongue, so she should not use it. But she says that she speaks 3 languages. So one is the language that is English, one is Malayalam, which is the third language. She says she writes in 2, that's English and Malayalam, but it's the third language that's very interesting. She dreams in 1. So she knows the third language, which is that of dreaming, which is of probably fantasy, which is of a world in which she can express herself freely. But one must say that it is this third language that finds its way certainly into English. I don't have access to the Malayalam text, but I'm sure there too. It is her language of dreams and fantasy that finds its way into the 2 languages in which she writes. So here she's making a case. Again, this is a poem from the 1960s. And she's already set the stage for many things. For color.
Is she not making a kind of ideological statement here? Because she is saying that she cannot dream in the other 2 languages, and she can dream in a language which is her own, and she doesn't want to define it. She doesn't say it's Malayalam, she doesn't say it's English, it is something else, which means that she is withdrawing into the silence of her own mind, her own imagination, where she would like to dream, she would like to fantasize, and fantasy and dreams, they take stock of the walls, the human figures, the sky, the colors, and all those things. And sometimes you don't need a language to dream in. So how would you respond to this?
So I think it's very clear that Kamla Das is making it quite clear that, and which is why I said that we see Indian feminism in the making here. She's very clear because the language of dreams can never be structured. So, which is why she dreams in that language. One cannot dream, and especially in the context of women.
What is that language? In which?
So, it's the language of the body, it's the language of passion, it could be the language of her emotions. So, it's a different landscape, but it cannot be a structured language.
Word structures.
It cannot have a linguistic framework to it. So, it is a language that is very different. It will find its way into the two languages in which she writes. In fact, it's this third language that will determine the flow, one may say, of the two languages that she
So the
writes
most
in.
precious part of her writing is contained in the
Third
language of
language.
dreams, which is not language at all in the usual sense of the word. And there, the dreams will define what language is for her, specifically for her, to her.
Yes,
Yes.
that is true. So I think this is interestingly, this is the first half of this poem. So I have read out lines from the first half, where we are conscious of color, we are conscious of Indian English writing and discussion on languages. And of course, in her life writing, My Story, she talks about how women from her community never talk about the body.
But as a person with a body, as a person with her desires, and she is not able to define those desires, but at least she can feel them inside herself, and therefore remaining away from language and talking about those dreams, not talking. I think she leaves that to our imagination, but definitely she has, as you rightly point out, she is hinting towards a kind of woman with a body, with desires, a normal woman. Growing up, in a circumstance which is not entirely hers.
So she actually associates more with the figure of Radha, who waits, and she says that she looks at her life as more akin to that of Radha, who waits on the banks of Jamuna for her blue-skinned lover. She says, and if you look at the second part of the poem, again, it's hard-hitting, because here she says, and I'll read it out: I was child, and later they told me I grew. For I became tall, my limbs swelled, and one or two places. When I asked for love, not knowing what else to ask.
Oh, no, I read that poem, and it's one of the finest poems that she's written. And I have talked about it, but what is being done in this poem, so far as I'm concerned, is her defining of self. And that, she is in the process, this is in the biological, social process of growing up. And she is tall, and she will have limbs, and she would have a different kind of connect with the world outside. People will look at her, keep her under gaze, make her self-conscious, and that she will not belong to that world. So therefore, she'll withdraw from that world into her own, and there, she'll keep dreaming. She might be sad also, and the sadness is a defining part of her personality for a long time, to which you referred in the beginning itself. So, if this point has been made, then it is certain that Kamla Das has contributed a lot in terms of individuality of the woman in the 1960s and 70s.
So in fact, in this poem, she also kind of talks about how the society asks her to behave in a certain manner. So, for instance, she is asked to dress in saris, be girl, be wife, be embroider, be cook, be a quarreler with servants, fit in. So, and so these are two very distinct parts to this poem. And she says, be Amy, be Kamla, be Madhavi Kutti. Choose a name, a role. Don't play pretending games. I think it makes it very clear. What she's saying is that she should not adopt different roles. She should only adopt the role which the society wants her to. And she is rejecting that in her poetry. And I think going back to the 1960s, this is a very, very bold attempt. And it shows us how feminism is being molded and shaped by women like Kamla Das.
Kamla Das, true. And friends, as we draw close to the discussion, let me also tell you that Kamla Das came from, which has been pointed out by Professor Payal Nagpal, from Kerala. And Kerala is the state, which has this large-scale, process of education, and people can talk to themselves. The people can talk to others. They can dream about things, and that Kerala is not exactly like other parts of India, where women are still shrouded in a kind of orthodoxy, in a kind of stalemate. And it's a woman in Kerala who is dreaming, who is expressing herself, who is finding structures, but those structures are limiting in nature, restrictive in nature, and they don't allow her to speak further. But then that's how women have lived in India since time immemorial, and there is no reason why they should now, get adjusted to that language and to that life, in a manner that was orthodox. So you have in Kamla Das a kind of orthodox, anti-orthodoxy attitude, critical attitude, and the expression of longing of the body, of the desire, etc. And that's how Kamla Das stands out in the 1960s and 70s. And you rightly said in the beginning itself that it's a feminism in the making.
In fact, if I may just read out a quote, when she's interviewed, she says that, there was no model that was available to her that she could fall back on. So her mother also was a writer. And she says that when I was growing up, there was no tradition to fall back on, no model to emulate. And she says, then the question is, why didn't you emulate your mother? So she writes about her mother. She says, mother was a writer. Mother is still a writer, but she never wrote freely. The prescribed themes for women's writing were God and domestic bliss, nothing else. The body, the physicality was to be ignored. And she brings that squarely, at the center of her poetry. The body, physicality is brought there. Her observations, her understanding of society, looked at from the woman's point of view, are very sharply presented, I think, in her poetry.
And because we have some kind of familiarity with other languages and particularly women's languages, but I think the kind of example that Kamla Das represents here is unique because she is not just conscious, she is also self-conscious, and self-consciousness is a quality, is a strong point with her. So with these comments, I believe viewers that you are face to face with a writer who had external life, who had also internal life. The external life constituted different languages, the society, the community of the grandmothers and mothers, and later, her own individual self, and that the combination of these are represented so well and well expressed also in Kamla Das's writing. As Professor Payal, Nagpal and I, both of us are ignorant regarding Malayalam, but then we can, see that Malayalam experience seeping through the English that she uses. So I think it's a good example. We have started well, on the point of feminism in Indian writing in English, and we'll take this argument further through other poets later on in the series. So till then, I think your viewers, you should be aware of a different voice in Kamla Das, and let's see whether this voice is preserved and in fact allowed to prosper further. That we have to wait and see. Thank you.